I'm happy to be interviewing Dr. Larry Senn. He's the founder and chairman of Senn Delaney and a true pioneer in the field of corporate culture. Larry, you've been gracious enough to share your insights at cultureuniversity.com, and I'm so excited to take things to a little deeper level here.
It's great to be talking to you.
All right, thank you. Let's start with a little history.
Sure.
How did you come to focus on the field of culture?
Well, it's interesting. I kind of backed into it given that I was an engineer by background and went through UCLA's engineering school, also through the MBA program. But I found I loved case studies in business school and decided I wanted to do consulting work. As I went out to do traditional consulting work, strategy, process, system, what I quickly found, it was easier to decide on change than to get people to change. Yeah. And that the more companies I looked at, it seemed they were all like a bit like dysfunctional families. They had turf issues and trust issues, resistance to change. And it was very easy to do things in some companies. It was almost impossible in others. I think my epiphany came in doing some work for Sam at Walmart in the early days, helping to design the original supply chain when he had his vision of taking low-cost goods to rural America. And it was so easy to work there. We couldn't sell them much consulting work because you give them an idea and they'd run out the door to implement it. At the same time, I was trying to work at Woolworth on change. And I remember flying from Bentonville to New York and going into their meeting. It was just like a bunch of old guys sitting around a table, and their only purpose seemed to be to maintain the status quo. And I said to myself, you know, this little company's going to take over the world, and this one's going to die.
Oh my.
And there's something they didn't teach me in school. And that began the journey. So I found a professor at USC, Dr. Wolf, who had put together a little booklet called Readings in Organizational Character, just observation of the phenomenon. And I said to him, I said, Dr. Wolf, I have to understand what this is because it's the most important thing to the success of our clients. And he said, well, you know, we all know it's there, but no one's ever studied it. What if we paid your way through the doctoral program? And that began the journey in about a 5-6 year period of time. And while consulting, he said, you know, you've got clients, you've got field research you can do. So I did the first field research on corporate culture while taking classes in anthropology, sociology, psychology, as well as strategy and economics. And so that's where the idea came from. It was just a real world thing that we all know there's something going on in organizations. And what I didn't realize then is that you can really shape that.
Okay. Before we get into your approach, can you share a little more about some of the people that have influenced you over that journey and influenced your way of thinking about this subject of culture?
Well, you know, as I think about it, it's interesting because I see this work at this point in my life as more of a mission than a job.
Okay.
And I think that came from my dad. He came out of the first class of environmental engineers in America, University of Wisconsin. And he devoted his life to trying to better health. In fact, I remember when thought he was crazy. When he was 85 years old, he was working with about 1,000 Tamils in the northern provinces of Sri Lanka, covering up open wells to avoid waterborne diseases that were killing children. And that was just driving him. And I didn't realize it then, but I think I got part of that in terms of what this work is. But I think in terms of, I've been more influenced probably by leaders we've worked with. Although I must say, I was greatly influenced by an early social scientist, a guy named Kurt Lewin. And as we talk about the process, he plays a role in that. But I think in terms of leaders, I think David Novak, in fact, I was looking at, David Novak's got a book, Taking People With You. And he ran a company called Yum Brands with 1.7 million employees. And I met him when he first came out of PepsiCo in his first CEO job at KFC. And he said, Larry, I believe if I could create a recognition culture where people where managers were really positive in dealing with employees, I could really shape an organization that could take over the world. And today they're building a restaurant a day in China, and it's quite amazing. The other leader that influenced me is a guy named Les Wexner at Limited Brands, Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works. In fact, he received the first ever Lifetime Achievement Award from CEO Magazine just last December. I went there with him to receive that. And he's such an innovative guy. He's an older guy like me, with younger kids like me. So I think we relate to each other. But he, walking around San Francisco, he saw this little store called Victoria's, and now we have 1,000 Victoria's Secret stores. Yeah. And so he's done some amazing things, and having a very agile, curious. I think Warren Bennett said he's the most observant and curious CEO he knows. And I've learned about curiosity and the desire to always learn and grow from him.
That's great. Well, I know you have some very strong feelings about purpose and the importance of thinking about purpose when you're dealing with workplace culture. Speak a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting. Culture has reached a tipping point. It's interesting. Malcolm Gladwell said in a blog recently, I'm convinced that the greatest predictor of a company's future is its culture. So I think after 50 years, we got there in terms of people getting that culture makes a difference. Drucker is right. Drucker's right in terms of what he said in terms of culture eats strategy for breakfast. But where purpose comes in, I think purpose is where culture was about 10 years ago. The fact that if organizations that can uncover their noblest cause, our work with children's hospitals is an example of that. We can really get people to really sign up for different behaviors because they have a higher purpose. And so the idea of an organization discovering what its noble cause or higher purpose is, and having that, what that tends to do is it brings out the best in people. We tend to be at our best. It's not about us, it's about something bigger than us. We're connected to purpose. When it's about us, then it's all about me and poor me, and I don't perform nearly as well. So we work with all of our clients in helping them be clearer on what it is that why do they deserve to exist? What is it they contribute to society? If they can have a North Star as a purpose, then the right kind of behaviors, which culture is, to fulfill that purpose, they tend to get the highest results.
Okay, and you also wrote a book called Up the Mood Elevator.
Yes.
And where does mood fit in this with the connection of purpose and behavior?
Well, it's interesting. Every moment of every day in our lives, we ride this thing I call the mood elevator.
Okay.
All it is what our feelings are at any moment in time. So in the higher levels, we're at creative, resourceful, grateful, innovative. Okay? At the lower levels, we're at insecure, worried, bothered, self-righteous. Now think about it in terms of fulfilling purpose. When we're about purpose, we tend to be at our best. And the higher states of the mood elevator are when we're at our best, kind of top of our game. Those are the times where no matter what's coming at us, we feel we can handle it. It's those times where this idea drops in, you don't know where it came from. You're taking a walk, you're taking a shower, and you get this flash of insight. That's when we have this quieter mind that's at the higher levels of the mood elevator. So learning to ride the mood elevator, because we all won't always be up. In fact, have you ever said something to a loved one you wish you could take back?
Right.
Have you ever written an email you shouldn't have written? Well, where were you in the mood elevator? You were down there. Because your thinking is unreliable. And so it's, the role it plays is this, is that healthy cultures are cultures in which more people are operating more of the time at their best in the higher states of the mood elevator. And that's when they have the best behaviors to create a culture.
Okay. In spite of those great intentions and
Yes.
that excellent mood, you've also talked about the jaws of culture. What are
Yes.
the jaws of culture?
Yes. In fact, going back to Drucker, Drucker has been proven now when he was the original one who did say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's the jaws of culture that do that. So
Okay.
most companies invest their money in initiatives, in strategies and processes and structure, and then all that stuff has to go through what we call the jaws of culture. And what those jaws are the dysfunctions of an organization.
Okay.
Are there turf issues, or is it one company? Do people blame one another when things don't work, or are they accountable? Do you tend to have a positive spirit or not have a positive spirit in the organization? Do people feel appreciated or not? So all those things are there, and the primary jaws of culture in most organizations today are there's not enough collaboration in organizations, there's not enough agility, much of a learning mindset for the kind of world we're in, and those things, no matter what the initiative is, are going to chew it up, and those are the jaws of culture.
Okay, so that leads right into how do we deal with those jaws. You wrote the book Winning Teams, Winning Cultures, and you have a five-step change approach. Can you briefly review that, and then we'll dive into each step a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think it starts with every organization has a culture. The only question is, does it shape you or do you shape it?
Okay.
So in most organizations, people just step into and they pick up the behaviors of people that are there. That's what a culture is about. And yet you can systematically and intentionally shape a culture. and yet it needs to be a comprehensive kind of overall process to do that. So it's a pretty rational model we use. Step one is really to find out what the gap is, to diagnose the organization. Given what you're facing, what are the behaviors you need, and what are the behaviors you have? So we create kind of a from-to model, from being hierarchical to being more empowering, from being siloed to being more collaborative, from being resistant to change to being very agile. So you try to find out what these, at this moment in time to execute your strategies, what are those shifts you need to make happen? That's the diagnostic. Now here's the challenge though. As I finished my dissertation as a young man, the big question I faced was, well, gosh, how do you change habits of adults?
Right.
Well-intentioned, successful people at the top of an organization, because culture shaping does need to start at the top of the organization. In fact, the principal finding of my dissertation was that organizations become shadows of their leaders. It happens in life, it happens in families. My parents have affected me, and I affect my company, so that's how it works. And so you do need to start at the top. But those habits are pretty deeply entrenched. So there was this social scientist, a guy named Kurt Lewin, and he said two things that have influenced our work. One was, when we're young, we're like a flowing river, and then we freeze. We get stuck in these habits. And so how do you get unstuck? Most models of change today are what we call behavioral models. People define a set of values, then they communicate about them, they talk to people about them. But you know, that doesn't tend to change people. We all know we should do things we don't do. So, but what does change people? Well, let's take someone who had a poor diet and didn't exercise, and then they have a heart attack. All of a sudden you see them walking around the block and eating greens. Okay. What happened? They got a wake-up call. So I said, well, as an engineer, why don't I engineer epiphanies, engineer ahas, so you can shift that underlying thinking that shifts behaviors. So let me give you an example of that. We do a lot of work in the Midwest, a lot of great Midwest values culture. But in the Midwest, there's this phenomenon called Midwest polite. In fact, there's an extreme version of it in Minnesota called Minnesota nice. And so what that comes from is all those people like me, I'm from Wisconsin, our moms told us, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Right. Okay. So that's an underlying belief I have. Well, if I can have an insight that says, gee, as a leader, if you work for me, my job is to help develop you. In fact, if I don't give you appreciative and constructive feedback, you won't grow. I'll let you down. I'll let the organization down. I won't be a good leader. So if I can have that shift in mindset through an epiphany and change that behavior, then I'm going to really execute differently going forward. So the second step in the process is what we call unfreeze. So diagnose the from-tos, then unfreeze the old behaviors and connect people at a gut level, not an intellectual level, to behaviors. Then once you've done that, you should reinforce it. And you should use it to run your meetings and make decisions, and you should measure it to make sure you're making progress. So that's our do-ram 5-step model for shaping a culture.
In the diagnose piece, yes. I mean, you've worked with some of the largest companies in the world.
Yes.
I mean, that's your unique talent and strength is in that specific area. How do you make the business connection so that those ahas also connect to business results in some way, and they see that connection between behavior and driving the bottom line of the business?
Right. And absolutely, unless people saw a practical application, this is not just about feeling good.
Right.
We've worked to date with 116 Fortune 500 CEOs. And many of those CEOs 2 or 3 times in their career, they rehired us. And so there is a business reason. Well, I think that what people know, for example, is that in this day and age, we really can't survive unless we can be a bit more agile and innovative. And they see that. So if you can find ways to have them be more agile and innovative, and they can use that to make shifts, that'll make a difference. I'll give you a real case study. The company called Sun Edison. And back at the time when the solar industry had their big hit in terms of prices dropping, and Obama or the government lost $500,000 with the solar company, Sun Edison was really challenged. Okay. Today their stock price is up 1,000% from $1.76 to $20. And where'd that come from? Well, they focused on a noble cause, which is to eradicate darkness. They build solar-powered cities in India and around the world. And they created a set of values that included things like accountability, collaboration to make that happen. And they used those to drive their business results. So we have so many clients that can drive business results with this that both, they know it intuitively, but if we can give them some evidence
Okay.
of clients that do that, evidence like that, or limited brands. L brand stock price is up like 5 times in the last 4 years by living what they call the limited way, which is their culture.
Okay. So I know some people may struggle coming up with that noble cause. They
Yes.
may say, hey, I'm in kind of a boring business.
Yes.
There's no noble cause. What do you
Yes.
say to those types of leaders?
There is a purpose we have. Interesting example, you wouldn't think that Victoria's Secret has a noble cause, would you? They're a wonderful organization. But the reality is they do. They enhance the self-esteem of women. They have 4 women CEOs running their 4 divisions. They have more women managers than most any company in America. But they also were the biggest contributor to the James Cancer Center because they believe that by doing well, we can do good. So there is underneath most companies a way that you really can have a higher order purpose in the world. It's just a matter of discovering it.
Okay. So after a leader has that aha moment, what's the role of systems and other reinforcements to help support the behavior they're targeting? What are the types of things you do to define that and help organizations reinforce the behavior they're looking for?
Well, culture is kind of the water we swim in, so unless you adjust things, so we typically form a culture leadership team in an organization. And once they're really clear on the culture they want, the ideal culture they want, then you need to adjust your selection process, people you hire, new employee orientation, performance management, succession planning, communications. You have to run meetings differently. So we have this great process called, would you like fewer, better, shorter meetings? And so how do you get a group to align around decisions? So what happens in most companies is the meeting happens after the meeting in the hallway. It doesn't happen in the meeting. So if you can get people to really have the meeting, and then when they go out of there, all do what they agreed to do, it's amazing the progress you can make in terms of making things happen faster, making things happen better. I think that's the key, one of the keys to L brands. They have a way of making decisions that makes them based on USC, one of the most agile companies in America.
Okay. How do you connect this aha at the top leadership level all the way down through a very large organization where people's mindsets need to shift and you need ahas at all levels? How do you go about that?
Well, we have 4 principles of culture shifting. One is you got to start at the top.
Okay.
And one is that you have to have personal change. But one is you have to have momentum and mass to change a culture. It's almost like the train needs to leave the station and head north, and you better get on board.
Yeah.
And so what happens in our organization is you begin with the senior team, you quickly cascade down to that next level so you can get that top, maybe 200 people involved in the process. And then we train internal facilitators.
Okay.
We have more volunteers than we need to learn to do this, to be able to take it down into the organization and then support it with leader kind of led conversations at all levels. So, we're working with Citibank, 200,000 people, 50 countries around the world, and they'll be taking this process to everybody.
What are some of the common challenges you run into with some of these large-scale transformations where it starts out well, maybe at the top, but what are typical things you run into as you try and scale it across a large organization?
The biggest single factor is the CEO.
Really?
Yes. If they have the passion, if they stay the course, it will work. If we've ever had problems, it may have been a change in a CEO midstream, or a CEO with not enough commitment for the longer term to make it happen. But that's rare because what's interesting about this system, it's a pull system versus a push system. Most people would rather live up the mood elevator.
Okay.
Most people would really rather be collaborative, accountable, be in a trusting environment. So when you make that available to people, they want it. In fact, there's a demand pull. Once a senior team goes through, people say, what happened to them? When do I get to do it?
Okay.
And that kind of continues on down through the organization.
Okay, that's outstanding. You've also talked about how culture transformation only comes with personal transformation. Say a little bit more about that.
Well, we are deep, deep creatures of habit.
Okay.
And so the problem with most models out there, in fact, Enron had a great set of values on the wall.
Yeah.
And they may have even had them in their employee orientation, but they didn't really exist there because of the habits of the leaders and the shadow that was cast there. So unless people really, we talk about an inside out versus an outside in method of learning.
Okay.
And unless you get culture at the gut level, not here, but down here, it's not going to change. And so that's why you need to have this personal change. And it's not just at work. What's interesting is one of the concepts that people resonate with that we talk about is this notion of being here now, being in the present, being in the moment. It's great for listening, but it's also great to quiet the mind, to have that happen. So what people realize is, gee, I'm not being here now in a meeting, I'm on my devices. But when I go home, I'm not there either. It's when you walk in the door and you say, huh, and realize you just brought your body home and not your mind. And so what happens is they find this begins to enhance their total life, their relationship with their kids, relationship with their spouse. And so it becomes a lifestyle change, not a leadership change. It becomes a life habit change that's enriching.
Okay. I saw "Be Here Now" on the walls of your offices.
Yes,
You have
saw my plaque on my desk over there.
you have the purpose on the wall.
My
You have the-
14-year-old son has about 12 of those from there. He'll walk up to me like this when I'm not being here now. And I go to his volleyball games. I don't bring my smartphone. I just watch his volleyball game.
I love your offices here. The mood elevator's up. You talked about the open design. Tell me about Senn Delaney's culture.
It's interesting. We did some brand work a while back. And if you look at our logo, it's a lion with a heart. And that stands for bold and courageous. We want to make a difference in the world. Our purpose is to have a positive impact in the world by inspiring leaders to create thriving cultures. So we're gathered here together in common purpose. We're a purpose-driven organization. But we also believe that we have to be the message. You can't teach something you aren't. And so it's very important to us who we hire, how we orient them, that they live our values. So we have our own set of values at Senn Delaney. And one of those is operate from a healthy state of mind, the mood elevator. And so I'd like to think that we are the message, we don't just teach the message, and that's how we need to be.
Okay. So let's go back to the tipping point.
Yes.
And culture was the Merriam-Webster Word of the Year
Right.
for 2014.
Yeah.
Obviously, awareness is growing. What troubles you about the state of workplace culture in organizations today, and what are you doing to try and transform that situation?
We're at a rare moment in history where people are getting it about culture, is trying to get about purpose. And I guess what troubles me most is that people aren't going about it comprehensively enough.
Okay.
It's like everybody says they're in the culture business no matter what they do.
Right.
And everybody has a little piece of culture, but it's the kind of thing where you have to really hit it with critical mass. You can't just go around the edges. And so I think people are not taking on culture holistically enough.
Right.
And I think that, and they're also trying to do it intellectually. So the biggest reason culture change is that not that people can't define something, not that they can't measure something, they can't change the behaviors of people.
Okay.
And so unless you really have some kind of process which creates these deeper level commitments to life change in people, you aren't going to get the best culture.
Okay. Talk about this energy, momentum, and mass, because I totally agree with you that there's so many superficial approaches to it, and everyone seems like they're in the culture business. But to really build that energy, momentum, and mass, I mean, you go through some substantial transformations in organizations. Talk a little bit about the scope and magnitude of what's really required to just start the process to form a new cultural attribute.
Well, the first misconception is that it takes a lot of time. What's interesting is that the biggest criticism I get from CEOs is, why didn't you talk me into doing this sooner? Okay. I was talking to one the other day who said, gosh, it just seems like too big an undertaking. And I was trying to explain, no, culture is not another initiative. Culture is the enabler of all initiatives. Mm-hmm. Once you begin to get it right, then decisions flow faster, ideas flow better to make it happen. So it does need to start with a serious commitment with the senior team in an organization, and they need to show up differently. People need to say, what's going on up there? Why are they talking to me differently? Why are they coaching me now? They didn't used to do that.
Right.
And then that begins to move down the organization. So it doesn't take a great deal of time from anyone. It's almost like in the early days of retailing, somebody said, we don't have time to smile. No, it doesn't take time to smile. It doesn't take time to do culture. You just need to start behaving differently. So it is a commitment by a CEO and senior team And if they make the commitment to really take it top to bottom, and they have processes which every month, in our case, we have monthly culture conversations with every team in the organization once we get started. So we're taking a topic like the mood elevator, having a little conversation. How can that help us be a better team? How can that help us reach our goals? That kind of conversation creates an energy force in an organization that begins to move the whole thing.
And it all starts with that top team,
top team
starting to transform.
Yes.
Well, how much time does it take to go through this type of a cascade approach and to really engage deep into the organization?
Well, it's interesting. One of the reasons we came up with that principle is we found that the faster they went, the better culture changed. A great example is USAA is a remarkable company, the military insurance company. They have the highest customer loyalty in America today. They have the highest customer service scores in America today. They have some of the best numbers in the financial service community. And at the time we began the process, it was run by a guy named General Joe Robles, who was second in command in Desert Storm, but he was known as the People's General. And he said, I am the chief culture officer. In fact, there's a great video of him on our website. And he took the process, once his senior team did it, to next 19 teams in about 90 days. Wow. And that organization was on fire. Then they got facilities and went down from there. So we moved faster than any client we've had and got better results. So I'd say we see results within 6 months. To get a whole organization, it's probably an 18-month process for most organizations. But it doesn't need to be a lot more than that.
Okay. Going back to the subject of speed.
Yes.
I know you're very interested in the subject of agility. Can you talk more about agility and the importance of agility in organizations? Yes,
probably no time in our history where the need to be able to be agile, because we don't know exactly what's coming out. We don't know where the next Uber is. We don't know, in any industry, things can delay. So unless you're an organization that can read the signs and adjust quickly, you're not going to be able to survive. So one of the biggest things our clients are asking us for is help us be more agile and innovative. Okay. And where that comes from, we think, is from, there's a middle level on the mood elevator. Right in the middle it says curious. Okay. And curious is a very, very powerful level, because if someone does something you don't understand, you can either go to judgment or curiosity. But if you live at curiosity, as Les Wexner does at Limited Brands, what happens is that creates a growth mindset, which creates more innovation and agility. And so it's using tools like that. We've done a recent study with Carol Dweck at Stanford on agility study, just publishing it. And it really dug into this. She wrote a great book called Mindset. And the theory is that people tend to have either a fixed mindset where I know the answers, I'm the expert, or a growth mindset, well, gee, I don't know. And senior leaders aren't that good at not being the expert. And that's the enemy of getting better. So I have 5 kids and 5 grandkids, and I've learned so much from them. I think seeing the world through the eyes of a child and always saying, I'm not sure, I don't know. And part of what we do in our process is we do little exercises where people are sure they're absolutely right and they find out they're wrong. Now, why do we do that? So they begin to create a little humility. To say, well, maybe I better pay attention. Maybe there's something I don't know. And that puts them on the path to learning and a growth mindset.
Can you give one example of one of those exercises?
Well, I mean, one's interesting. We'll put up a collage, a lot of different objects, have people write down what they see. Nobody in the room sees the same thing. Now, when I showed that same collage to my son when he was about 6, there were 100 items there, but he saw Shrek, Buzz Lightyear, the Cat in the Hat, and Toys R Us. Well, that's because we're only seeing, it's an example of I only see what's important to me. You see what's important to you. Now we're in a meeting. What happens? But if I can be curious and say, gee, what are you seeing I don't see? All of a sudden we have a different kind of meeting. So very simple tools and techniques like that can unfreeze habits and create new dynamics in teams and organizations.
I know you've done some research on the subject of vitality.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Well, we did research on a concept called thriving. Okay. And working with University of Michigan, USC, and to isolate the factors that determine a thriving human being. And they're a 72% predictor of success. They reduce people's stress, they increase engagement. And one of those factors was vitality. And vitality is simply living a set of values in a hopeful and optimistic way in community with others. So if I can live healthy values within Senn Delaney, and do that coming from the upper level of the mood elevator, from hopeful, optimistic, resourceful, then that's what vitality is about. So the other two factors were, one was to have a learning and growth mindset. We just talked about that for agility. That's where the agility study came from. And the other one is purpose, which we talked about, having purpose and direction. So having purpose and direction, living a healthy set of values in your culture, and having this kind of growth mindset really defines success.
Okay. What are some of the other major challenges CEOs have to overcome when it comes to just making a commitment to workplace culture and some of the transformation efforts that you advocate?
I think they just have to decide. I think the reasons they decide, the reason that this is a good time for culture and why it's really hit the tipping point is that in addition to agility, most companies are very fragmented. Most big corporations out there today are a collection of acquisitions or geographies or business units or product lines. They aren't one company. And they really can't afford to be fragmented today for the customer, for cost, for anything else. So one of the big cries out there is this one company theme. There are almost no holding companies left today. They're too inefficient, but there are all very few fully integrated businesses too. So the answer is this kind of allied or shared business model in the middle, and that works only with the right culture. And only if you have decisions for the greater good, with everybody having some common higher cause. So creating one company out there today is critical. Also the number of mergers. We're involved in the CVS Caremark merger, for example, in the Tyco Pentair merger. So mergers, when you have a merger, this cultural clash, and 80% of mergers don't meet their full potential, half of them fail. That's because they don't deal with the culture. So there's some very big business reasons to deal with culture to avoid the billions like Sprint lost in buying Nextel with cultural clash, and to create one company which tends to utilize the common shared resources and customer satisfaction, so it more than pays for itself there.
Okay. You've talked a lot about the process internally you go through. How does this connect with customer experience and the interaction with customers? How does all this internal work bridge to that side of things?
Well, if you follow a shadow of the leaders or shadow of influence to its ultimate conclusion, if leaders have a healthy relationship with employees, then employees have a healthy relationship with customers. And so that's why they have such high customer loyalty at, say, USAA, because it's a healthy culture with a high purpose. So create a healthy culture with a high purpose, and you will have great customer interaction.
So I want to close with going back to your purpose at Senn Delaney and some of the new things you're working on to really live out your purpose here.
Well, I think the biggest thing is we're very committed to having an impact in the world, and felt that we wanted to do that even more so. So we decided we needed to have a strategic partner to help us move this forward. So we're now a part of Heidrick Struggles. I think one of the roles, the originator of the retained search industry, just like we're the originator of the culture shaping industry. And they have offices all over the world. So our ability to, we're now talking to people at a South African phone company. As a result of that, we're working to transform the oil industry in Mexico, Pemex. Can you imagine that affects the whole economy of a nation if we can help create a culture which can move out of this nationalistic oil industry to make that happen? And those things have come to us through our partnership with Heidrick Struggles. And so I see us touching the world in a bigger way in more places by doing that, and that's really what we're about.
And what about you personally and supporting your personal purpose through this work?
Well, the challenge I have is that I probably should have retired some time ago. I have my 80th birthday this year, okay? But I can't. How do you quit your purpose? How do you stop doing your purpose? Because I love the work, I love what we do, and so that's why I said this job is my mission, not my job. And for me, these concepts make a difference because they're what bring vitality, they bring a learning mindset, and that all comes from doing this work. So I want to be surrounded by this and make a difference, and at the same time be a great dad for my kids.
All right, that sounds awesome. So thanks again for sharing your insights, and we look forward to hearing more from you at cultureuniversity.com. Thanks so much.
Okay, great.
Thanks a lot.